And Metamora Films is just a company that I started about 4 years ago, about 6 months after I got out of prison. So it's a film company that focuses on films that transpire and provoke thought, and our slogan is transform hearts and minds. So how does this tie into all of this? Well, as you'd mentioned, that we filmed in Oakland a couple weeks ago, a new law about the International Megan's Law and the passports. I'm going to get into that in a second. So I would have to say there's more organizations coming now and more people getting involved in this sort of thing, and that's great. Well, 10 years ago, I don't know how many people would have been involved. A lot less. And we're also going to hear from Molly a lot tonight, because I had interviewed her for this presentation. There's about a half dozen clips in here from Molly. So a registered sex offender is a person, male or female, who has been convicted of a crime involving a sexual act where the federal, state, or local laws require them to be placed on the sexual offender registry after they have served their criminal sentences or when they have been released on parole. So that's basically what the legal definition. We may have different definitions, but the first story, I use a lot of video in my presentations, but the first story is a man named Zachary Anderson. Some may have heard of this young man. Pam, yes. And this ends actually in some good news. He was a 19-year-old, and you're going to see a video clip here. And I don't know, we may have to dim the lights just when I play the video. Yeah, you could hit the lights. So how many registered, and I'll just use RSOs, and a term that I heard is a registered citizen, which I love that term. I heard that at the protest. So we'll just interchange those a few times. According to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, as of 2015, there was 843,000 registered sex offenders in the United States, Puerto Rico as well. And you could see Utah there at almost 7,200. Is quite a bit. Texas, obviously, depends on how large and populated the state is. Anyone can guess, out of 843 registered citizens, how many are youth? Approximately 25% of those registrants, those numbers there are youth, under 18. So before the Adam Walsh Act, only juveniles prosecuted and convicted as adults were required to register. So now that the Adam Walsh Act is in place, youths age 14 and older who are convicted of a crime comparable to aggravated sexual abuse or a more serious offense are subject to sex offender registration. And I know there's been reports of youth as young as 9 and 10 placed on the registry. So that's a whole different topic. I wish I could spend the whole night talking about that, but I'll touch on that a little bit later. So the goals for today, there's the number there, 25% of the registrants in the United States. So the goals for today, we're going to cover the issues and challenges of living as an RSO, and really we're going to focus on the families too, like how it affects the families, how it affects the children of the registrant, challenges for the family, and then workable solutions. And we're going to hear from Molly on some of those too. So anyone, I'm sure you've heard of this, Maslow's hierarchy of needs theory. And I really think this kind of ties in well, because when we lose these things down here, we run into trouble. We run into the safety, the housing, the jobs, and down in biological and psychological needs, the warmth and shelter and the sleep, then everything else can't happen. And so I really think that in some, the registry definitely affects these levels here for a lot of people and their families. So I wanted to put that in there. So you see Utah is highlighted. This is according to the Human Rights Watch, and they're the dependable source. They've done a lot of reports on these sorts of things. People can be put on the sex offender list for peeing in public. Don't do it in Utah, because you can be placed. I don't know if they would prosecute every single situation. I can't say, but it is against the law. You can be placed on the registry, and there's a handful of other states. So it's a very wide range of crimes when it comes to sex offenders. People can be put on the sex offender list for prostitution-related offenses, such as soliciting prostitution. Utah's not one of them, but there's about a half dozen. Length of registration. I could tell you that this is changing all the time. Police can't keep up with it. The Department of Corrections can't seem to keep up with it. New laws are being enacted where you may be able to get off earlier in some cases. But right now, is where it stands, generally, this is it. 10 years in Utah, but it depends on the offense. Okay, so adult sex offenders, we're talking about psychological effects, stable housing, and stable employment. I can tell you right now, by personal, what's going on, I know how hard this is. And I don't know how many registrants here or not, but it's very, very difficult. Employment and housing are huge hurdles. So we're going to start with the psychological impact. This is a map. I know there's numbers all over the place, but, and here's the source if you're curious. Collateral consequences experienced in these percentages. So lost a place to live. Total sample that they sampled here, 54% of registrants lost a place to live because of the registry. And it varies, depending on the victim here, what type of crime. Been asked to leave a business or a restaurant, lower, but still there. Lost a spouse, partner, you can see that. And then receiving harassing mailers, flyers, notes. It does happen. So lost a friend. That's all psychological, and it's difficult. So the psychological, I would have to say a sign in front of my house or this house, it would be devastating. In Texas, they recently passed a new ordinance that has created quite a buzz. All registered sex offenders, and that says all. I don't, that's what it said. So I'm guessing there's no levels there. We'll have to post signs in the yards letting people know about it. Registration sex offender lives there. I understand people want to be safe, and I'm not saying that there aren't, there's people that may need to be watched. I don't know, but this is way extreme. This is police officers. I can see this in like 100 years from now. We're looking back and say, oh my goodness. They put a sign in front of a sexual predator, which is different than a sexual sex offender, in Bradford County, Florida. Florida is notorious for very, very strict sex offender laws and restrictions. And then pedophile-free zones. This is not photoshopped. I didn't Photoshop this for drama. This is real. Iowa. And so there's things like this across the United States. It depends on the county, it depends on the city. Some laws are city-based, county-based, state, federal. It's all over the place. Oh my goodness. Molly Prince, she is here. She just introduced herself. She is an approved provider of a sex offender treatment in Utah. Anyone familiar with labeling theory? It was developed back in 1960s. Labeling theory was a criminological perspective that claimed deviance as a consequence of social reaction. So you think of those signs. That's definitely a labeling theory. Unfortunately, people who accept the labeling of others, be it correct or incorrect, have a difficult time changing their opinions of the labeled person, even the light of evidence in the contrary. So we know that the statistics show that sex offenders are one of the lowest recidivism besides murder, that the sex offender registry isn't doing anything, and most people that are abused, sexually abused, kids, most of those occur with people that they know. And so I think really it's In my opinion, it's just a false sense of security, I think, what we're doing. Stable employment. Oh, man. Oh, jeez, this is tough. This is really tough. And anybody have trouble finding employment because of their history? I'm sure there's many people. We go back to this chart. Been denied promotion at work. Almost 25% approximately. Been denied entrance to higher education. I am one of those people. I was denied entrance to a video production film online university. It's called Full Sail. It's very popular with, you know that? Okay. I was actually denied because I'm on the sex offender registry, and I was pissed. My wife can contest to that. I was really upset. But then I eventually got into the Academy of Art, University of San Francisco, so that's okay. But still, it's not right. There's been some advancement, some good news with this employment issue. There's a thing called Ban the Box campaign. You're familiar with that. I think that's good. I don't think it's going to help enough, especially for registered sex offenders. If the box is there or not, I don't think it matters. Most companies will do background checks, and that's could be the end of it. But it's not bad news. I think it's good news. But also, I think Ban the Box campaign is only for they're not for private private businesses. So if you went to go apply for Maverick, I think they can still technically have the question on there. So
it's for governmental.
Government. So I think it needs to be kind of spread out to a lot of different places. I just wanted to read this real fast about stable employment from a guy who was interviewed. 58-year-old Hispanic male quoted saying in this report, "I was called for a job that they told me I had. When they said they would do a background check, I told them I was a registered sex offender. I told him my crime was in 1991, and he said they only checked 7 years back." And sometimes they say that on the application. Have you been convicted of a felony within the last 7 years? So they called back 10 minutes later and told me I could not get the job because they talked to their legal department and said it would be a risk. I think in my opinion, I think we need to educate employers. They don't want to be embarrassed by having someone on the registry working for them. So I don't know how to solve that problem. I don't have an answer. I think just more education, and maybe there needs to be some kind of classes that employers can take if they're a store owner or whatever it may be. Stable housing is another a hurdle. There are, and I'll talk about this, but there are no housing restrictions in terms of where sex offenders can live in Utah. You can live next to a park. You can live next to a school. Will your probation officer like it? No, he probably wouldn't approve that. But once you're off probation, according to the Department of Corrections in Utah, there are no housing restrictions. That doesn't mean that they don't have safety zones, and I'll show you that in a minute, but protective zones that you're not supposed to go into that may cause you some trouble. So in order to have stable housing, you have to have stable employment. You have to have people willing to hire you and look past that label. It comes down to fear, I think. People are scared of the unknown. They don't know you. So as Molly said, I would just suggest if you go to a job interview, be yourself, carry yourself well, talk about your crime, but not too much. Don't get into all the details, which has probably been my fault because I like to talk and I just start talking about everything and it's just too much. So I wasn't going to talk about this, but I don't know. I just feel like I am currently living through this issue because my family and I are getting evicted this week. So and I'm not trying to have you guys feel sorry for us, but it is a real problem. I've struggled to keep employment. I get contract jobs. I have my business, but it's just not enough. I have applied for hundreds and hundreds of jobs, and I know a lot of people have here too, and a lot of people out there. It's not just me that are searching and trying to get on their feet and to prove themselves, and it's constantly rejection. So, I mean, we're going to make it. We're going to be fine, but it's tough. So now we're going to see the second video on this young guy, 19-year-old. This is the second part of his story. So harassment can be a problem in the communities when you're on the registry or you're living with a registrant, a family. in this survey, people reported, almost half of people surveyed reported being threatened or harassed by neighbors. 27% had their property damaged. 7% that they were physically assaulted by someone as a result of notification. I'm not trying to scare anybody here. I would say, I hope it doesn't happen here, but there has been some murders, vigilante-type violence a couple years ago, recently. Rare, but it does occur. In addition, most family members of RSOs, 86% reported that SORN, S-O-R-N, Sex Offender Registration Notification Act, SORNA, has created stress in their lives. 77% often felt a sense of isolation, and 49% often felt afraid for their own safety due to public disclosure of the sex offender's status. Half had lost friends or a close relationship as a result of community notification, and 66% that shame and embarrassment often kept them from engaging in community activities. I think the harassment comes down to the type of neighborhood you live in what state. There's a lot of issues in the South for whatever reason. I think most cities in Utah, you're not going to, what?
I can explain it to you.
Yeah, yeah. The South is just, I wouldn't want to live there right now. And so for me personally, you know, I'm a little bit nervous if I have to live in a neighborhood that's maybe a little bit more run down, a little bit sketchy, because I wouldn't feel safe there. I don't know what would happen. Hopefully nothing. In a 2012 CNN News report, mothers of sex offenders share responsibility, the burden of label. A dozen of parents of sex offenders declined to discuss their experience for this article from CNN, fearing that doing so would bring them harm to their families. Quote, "My son and I have just started to experience some level of peace and stability. It's not worth digging up the harassment again," end quote. One woman said in an email calling off an interview with CNN, quote, "No one understands the threats, harassment, loss of income, and dignity. I hope you find someone that can better take the risk. We have suffered enough humiliation." So these are real people out there contacting CNN saying, I can't handle it. I can't handle it. So, any questions so far about anything? No? Am I boring you? No. Okay. So let's get a little bit more into the Utah-specific laws and registration situations. So basically, you have to register. If you're a registered sex offender, you have to do it in Utah. But this law here in the registry law prohibits anybody, if you get harassed, you can press charges. I know I don't have any personal experience with harassment or anything. My neighbors have been really friendly, and I don't know if they know, but they've been overly friendly. It's weird. But that may come with just like the neighborhood that I live in. So just remember that, you know, I mean, if there's cases of harassment or stalking, you do have rights. They cannot use the sex offender registry to harass you. You have the registry and you have the crime. It doesn't, I'm not condoning the crime, but it just doesn't explain the situation of the crime. So you see child pornography, oh my goodness, you automatically think all of these horrible photos, but it might not have been that. In my case, it was non-nude photos. It was explicit, but it was non-nude. So people don't, and then you see enticement of a minor, and you see all these terms that they put on there, and it really scares people. And so I wish they would have some kind of phrase there that would explain the situation on how that person got. But see, no one cares. No one cares about the backstory. They just want to know.
No one cares about the facts.
No one cares about the facts. Yeah, yeah. Let's see. This is a little bit of a different survey, if you want to note that down. Collateral damage, family members of registered sex offenders. I think you can find that online. So this is damage. This is, family members are suffering because of this. If we go down a few, my family member, the RSO, had a very hard time finding a job because the employers don't want to hire a registered sex offender. And this has created financial hardship for my family. That sounds familiar. I'm going through that right now. 82%. My family member of the RSO lost a job because a boss or coworkers found out through Megan's Law the registry that he or she was a sex offender, and this created financial hardship for my family. So where is the balance between public safety and letting people try to live their lives again and not affecting the family members? I mean, I open that question. I don't know. I think this is definitely too much. This is a quote from David Prescott, the former president of the Association for the Treatment of Sexual Abusers. He said that the whole rest of society only sees the flashbulb moment of the sex crime and mugshot, just like what I was talking about, and very few people understand the person who does the crime as a person. Even after someone is arrested and convicted, everyone else distances themselves from the sex offender. There's often the mom trying to figure out what's going on to be right for their boy. So that's kind of an explanation of what I was just talking about, that we don't care about the backstory. We see that crime, and that's all we see. We don't see the whole person for who they are and what they've done since their crime and how they're trying to improve themselves. This is actually really, really, really sad. And I think, isn't this, Pam? Yes. Is this Women Against Registry? Yes, it is. Okay, maybe, do you mind? Just like, I know that, see, I found this online, and now I've talked with, I'm not Carolyn, but what's her name? Vicki Henry about this, and now I see there's a connection. So this was some kind of a rally going on in Florida, and the laws you attended to protect me and my family made me homeless. It's a real thing. And it's just not the registry. It's this public fear that is going to take so long to get over. Like, and I'll show it to you here in a minute. Unfortunately, I'm not connected to Wi-Fi. I was going to show you my blog, but maybe I'll just talk about it now. Has anyone heard of like moral panics? Like a moral panic in society throughout the years? The registry is the most recent one in a lot of people's opinions. We could go back through history. AIDS. Everybody was afraid of AIDS. Don't get next to that person. I'm going to get AIDS. So they didn't let some people with AIDS go into stores and whatever. We could think back to the witch trials. We could go back to lynching. Back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, they had this panic about sex offenders. And in this ad, they have 3 girls running, and they have a claw coming down. And this is when FBI Hoover, was the FBI main guy. And so they see that as a period of time when the society was really scared of something or somebody. Video game violence. Same thing. So I really think, and a lot of people think, and a lot of psychologists and criminal justice people think that this is the new moral panic going on in America. So we're going to talk about when youth are on the sex offender registry. Early versions of the Adam Walsh Act applied only to individuals convicted as adults for sex offenses. The Amy Zyla provision, one of the final revisions of the Act, expanded the definition of, quote, a sex offender to include juveniles adjudicated delinquent of certain sexual offenses. Now, under Megan's law, the Zyla expansion was hastily passed by the United States Congress in response to a high-profile sexual assault. It's always those big cases that cause just a ripple effect. This sounds like a lot what's happening with international Megan's Law and the passport identifiers. And at the end of this presentation, I think we've got time, that we went to Oakland and filmed this protest. They put in the provision, the passport identifier at the last second into the National Megan's Law, into the last second. No one really knew what it was. No one raised their hand, and it was only one person that actually went against it. And it was passed. How many are surprised about how many youth are on the registry? Juveniles adjudicated delinquent are subject to registration. So Utah is included. The states in kind of a whitish color are not. So most states are required to register. But are they public. That's the thing. So if we look, I think this is the next one if I'm right. No, it'll be the next one. So it requires lifetime registration. This is youth. Several states, Utah is not included. At this point, I don't know. So when you watch this presentation, just make sure to keep up with the laws because they do change very quickly. Information pertaining to juveniles is not disclosed to the public. Utah is one of them. I don't think it should be on the registry at all, but that's better than nothing. Oh, I don't know what this is doing. Game over. What am I playing? Let's see if here we go. Okay, I want to get out of there. Okay, I don't know what that was. Yeah, I know, it's like some virus, like the FBI is in my computer or something. So Utah, all offenders having a duty to register under the section may be subject to registration requirements in accordance to the Adam Walsh Protection and Safety Act of 2006. That's when I was arrested, right when the Adam Walsh Act was coming through. So it was just like really bad timing. This is really, really important if you are on the registry or if you know somebody on the registry in Utah, within 3 days working, 3 working days, any change in habitation, house, vehicle information, educational affiliation information, and any change of place of employment. So those are the big ones that you have to remember. In Utah, the protected zones, are you talking about the 5 protected zones? So yeah, that's kind of an interesting point. There's no law in Utah that says you can't live next to a school, but then if you get caught like on the property, if you get caught, you're gonna get arrested. So yeah, I would probably just recommend just staying away as far as you can, if possible. So there's 5 protected zones: licensed daycares or preschools, swimming pools open to the public, public or private primary, secondary schools, community park open to the public. What's ironic is the states can barely keep up with these laws, and there's really no good place online or someone to call to get answers to some of these questions. And the courts haven't really defined where children congregate very well. Children congregate in Walmart, children congregate in the mall. I don't see a mall here. These laws and restrictions are so specific. It's insane. I don't want to get anybody in trouble, and I'm glad you're clarifying some of these things. Yes?
How does it work with families? Like if you're doing something with your family as a group?
Like going to a community park?
No.
Or
At my house.
A birthday party, say, with kids.
Well, and one thing I want to say.
On parole or not?
Yes, parole off, on and off. And I wish I had this information a little bit better in my head, but I had read something that, and I don't know, maybe you know, Molly, that in some states, even if you're off paper, the registration says that you can't even be with minors.